Have you ever wondered why society is so obsessed with ranking people? Alpha leads, beta follows, sigma walks alone. But what about the man who doesn't walk? He runs, but to opposite side. The one who doesn't just reject the social hierarchy, but refuses to exist within it. That's the Zeta male. Not just outside the system, but almost against it. A sigma male might step away from the crowd, but a Zeta? He doesn't even acknowledge there was a crowd to begin with. At its core, the sigma male is still playing the game, just differently. He avoids traditional dominance hierarchies, but still operates within the framework of success. He values independence, solitude, and self-sufficiency, but he still engages with the world when needed. He is the lone wolf who roams but doesn't disappear. The Zeta male takes it further, too far perhaps. Where the sigma disengages strategically, the Zeta disengages entirely. Not just from people, but from the system itself. The workforce, relationships, social norms. He sees all of it as a trap and refuses to take part. This isn't just stepping away, it's dropping out. And at a certain point, that starts to feel like something darker, like an extreme detachment that borders on nihilism. There's a reason why society sees the Zeta male as an anomaly, sometimes even a threat. The sigma male functions in the shadows, but the Zeta male abandons the structure completely. And in a world where participation is expected, that kind of rejection starts to look criminal, not because it is, but because it challenges the foundation of everything society believes in: order, responsibility, engagement. What happens when you take isolation too far? Society thrives on participation. It doesn't care if you're an alpha ruling the pack, a beta following orders, or a sigma walking alone, as long as you're still part of the system. Even sigma males, for all their lone wolf mentality, still engage with the world. They work, they create, they stay within the rules, even if they bend them to their advantage. But Zeta males take it further, too far. They don't just step away, they vanish. A sigma male rejects hierarchy but still acknowledges its existence. He knows power structures are real, but he plays by his own rules. A Zeta male doesn't play at all. He detaches completely, often to the point where his existence becomes incompatible with society itself. Some call this radical freedom. Others see it as self-destruction. Because at what point does rejecting the system turn into rejecting life itself? Psychologically, this is where things get dangerous. Extreme disengagement can blur the line between independence and isolation. Some Zeta males embrace this fully, disappearing from conventional life, off the grid, outside the law, beyond the reach of responsibility. And when you detach that much, society starts to view you as a liability, not just different, but dangerous, because those who have nothing to lose are unpredictable. And history has proven time and time again, when a man fully rejects the world starts to see him as a threat. At what point does rejecting society turn into rejecting reality? If Zeta males have a philosophy, the concept of MGTOW, men going their own way, is the closest thing to it. Both reject conventional masculinity, relationships, and societal expectations. Both believe the game is rigged. But there's a difference. MGTOW is still a movement. Zeta males don't even want that. Men stepping away from modern relationships, especially marriage, claiming the risks outweigh the rewards. Legal systems, societal expectations, and shifting gender roles have made them skeptical of commitment, so they opt out. But here's the key difference. MGTOW men still exist within the system. They just avoid certain aspects of it. They work, they earn, they live, just without women, or at least without long-term entanglements. Zeta males, on the other hand, take this to an extreme. They don't just opt out of relationships, they opt out of everything. The workforce, social circles, participation in the broader system. It's all seen as pointless. If MGTOW is about walking away from the parts of life they don't trust, Zeta males question whether any of it is worth engaging with at all. But here's the problem. Total disengagement has consequences. The deeper you retreat, the harder it is to function. A man who steps away strategically, like MGTOW, can still thrive. A man who disappears completely, he risks becoming invisible. And what happens to those the world forgets? They either fade into irrelevance or resurface in ways society fears. What happens when you erase yourself from the world? But walking away isn't the same as having somewhere to go, and that's the real danger, when rejection of society turns into rejection of self. Because the deeper you sink into detachment, the harder it is to climb back out. Sigma males at least have a path. They work alone, but they work. They avoid attachments, but they build. Their independence is functional, not destructive. But a Zeta male? He removes himself from the system so completely that he risks losing purpose altogether. And no matter how much a man wants to believe he doesn't need the world, isolation comes at a price. Psychology has proven it. Long-term social disengagement affects the mind in ways we don't fully understand. A 2021 study on extreme social isolation found that people who detach for too long experience cognitive decline, emotional instability, and in some cases a shift in moral reasoning. When there's no feedback from the world, reality becomes subjective. What makes sense to an outsider might start to look unhinged to everyone else. And here's where it gets dangerous. A Sigma male is a lone wolf. A Zeta male becomes a ghost. And ghosts don't live, they haunt. The less a man interacts with the world, the less he exists within it. And eventually society stops seeing him as just an outcast. It starts seeing him as a problem. Because when a man has nothing, no ties, no obligations, no reason to care, that's when the system starts to see him as a threat. Society sees itself as the great organizer, the machine that keeps everything in balance. But to some, it's just another game to be played. Sigma males play it when they need to, bending the rules to their advantage. They manipulate when it serves a purpose, when the outcome benefits them. But Zeta males, they take it further. They manipulate not for survival, not even for gain, but because they can. For Zeta male, the system is a joke, an illusion held together by people who refuse to see past it. He has no interest in climbing ladders or bending rules because to him, none of it matters. And that kind of mindset creates a man who doesn't just ignore structure, he tests it. He pokes at it. Not always with malice, but with detachment, like a child pressing buttons on a broken machine just to see what happens. Not because he cares, but because he's curious. And that's what makes him unpredictable. The Sigma manipulates to get ahead, but the Zeta manipulates out of boredom or principle, or just to remind himself that none of it holds power over him. He might cause chaos, not because he wants to see the world burn, but because he wants to prove to himself that the fire was never real to begin with. A man who has no stake in the system, who disrupts it for no reason beyond his own amusement, that's not just an outsider, that's an error in the code. And errors, if left unchecked, tend to spread. What does the system do? It watches, it waits, it doesn't fear Zeta males because they want to destroy it. It fears them because they prove it was never absolute. And in a world built on order, that kind of realization is the most dangerous thing of all. Society doesn't like loose ends. It can handle rebels because they still acknowledge the system they fight against. It can handle outcasts because they still exist within its structure, even if they don't engage. But a Zeta male, he's something different. He doesn't resist the system. He just walks away from it, completely. And that is something the system cannot allow. A man who needs nothing cannot be controlled. He cannot be threatened with job loss, social exile, or financial ruin, because none of it matters to him. He doesn't seek approval. He doesn't need validation. And worst of all, he doesn't fear the consequences of his choices. This makes him an anomaly, something outside the equation, and society doesn't tolerate what it cannot predict. This is why true Zeta males are rare. Not because men aren't capable of complete disengagement, but because the system does everything it can to prevent it. The moment a man removes himself from the game starts pulling him back in. Laws, obligations, responsibilities, society makes sure no one can fully disappear without consequence. And for those who do, they are labeled, categorized, and watched, not because they are criminals, but because they are something worse. Proof that the system is not inevitable. Look at history. The men who refused to conform were rarely left alone, not because they were dangerous, but because their existence asked the wrong kind of questions. Questions that made others start wondering if they too could walk away. And that is a threat greater than any act of defiance. Because a war against the system can be fought and won, but a quiet exodus? That's something far more difficult to stop. The idea of the outsider isn't new. It has existed in different forms across history, philosophy, and myth. The Zeta male is just the latest name for something far older. A man who rejects structure, not because he wants to lead, not because he wants to dominate, but because he sees no reason to participate. And history shows us that men like this are often either forgotten or feared. Socrates, for example, had the mind of a Zeta. He questioned everything, refusing to accept the values of Athenian society without scrutiny. But unlike rebels or conquerors, he didn't seek to overturn the system for power. He simply detached from its illusions. And what did that get him? A death sentence. The system would rather destroy an anomaly than let it spread. This contrast matters because it highlights a crucial point. The Zeta male is not a leader, not even of anarchy. He simply does not see the game as worth playing. And that, in many ways, makes him harder to define, harder to place, and harder to ignore. The world has always had rulers, challengers, and those who submit. But the man who walks away entirely, he forces everyone else to wonder if the rules were real to begin with. And that is what makes him dangerous. What happens when detachment meets dominance? Society recognizes two kinds of men, those who lead and those who follow. Society was happy with alpha-beta structure, but what about those who do neither? That's where the Zeta and Prime males stand. Two extremes, both rejecting traditional roles, but in opposite ways. The Prime male is an amplified version of the Alpha. Where the Alpha thrives in the system, the Prime male breaks the system. He is not content with leadership. He wants control over the entire hierarchy. He doesn't play the game. He remakes it in his own image. If the Zeta is the devil, the Prime male is a god, shaping reality to fit his vision. He is not bound by rules. He enforces his own. And history and mythology have worshipped such figures. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, even mythological gods like Zeus, Odin, or Loki, who dictate the fate of others. He is not a ruler, he is a challenger. He simply walks with a hidden blade. He doesn't seek to dominate, but he destroys the king. This is why society has no place for either of them. The Prime male is feared because he is too powerful, too uncontrollable. The Zeta male is feared because he is too detached, too indifferent. One bends the world, the other rejects it entirely, and to a system built on order, neither is acceptable. Is the paradox of extremes. The Prime male reminds the world of its weakness. The Zeta male reminds the world of its irrelevance. And in a structure that demands participation, both are threats. Who in history has truly walked away? If the Prime male is a conqueror, the Zeta male is a ghost. And history has never known what to do with ghosts. Unlike conquerors and rulers, they don't leave monuments. Unlike revolutionaries, they don't leave movements. But they exist, and the system never forgets them. Diogenes, the Greek philosopher, lived like a stray dog by choice. He rejected social norms, mocked power to its face, and slept in a barrel because he saw no value in wealth or status. When Alexander the Great, the Prime male of his time, stood before him and asked what he wanted, Diogenes didn't bow, didn't flatter, didn't seek favor. He simply told the most powerful man in the world to step aside because he was blocking his sunlight. That is a Zeta mindset in its purest form. Absolute rejection of control, even when offered power itself. Men like this remind us that rejecting the system isn't just a theory. It has been done. And each time, society reacts the same way, with fascination, confusion, and quiet fear. Because deep down, people wonder, what if they were right? What happens to a man the system can't control? A true Zeta male doesn't vanish like an Omega. He doesn't just walk away. He takes pieces of the system with him, bending it in ways it doesn't expect. He exploits its flaws, plays the game without letting it play him, and when he's done, he disappears, leaving behind nothing but a temporary scar. Unlike a Sigma, who reshapes the system permanently, a Zeta male doesn't care about legacy. He is a disruption, not a revolution. And this is why power never truly fights him. The system can go to war with a Sigma because a Sigma wants something, a goal, an advantage, a win. But the Zeta? He is unpredictable, not because he is chaotic, but because he is indifferent. And there is nothing more frustrating to those in power than a man who cannot be motivated, controlled, or even fully understood. That is why, when he is gone, he is either ignored or erased. A Sigma male will be remembered because he left something behind, a new way of doing things, a shift in power, a crack in the foundation that others will build upon. A Zeta male, however, leaves only questions, a temporary disturbance. And once he's gone, the system moves on like he was never there, because to acknowledge him would be to admit that control was never absolute to begin with. Does the Zeta male win? No, but he never intended to. His power lies in the fact that he plays by his own rules and for a brief moment forces the system to adjust to him instead of the other way around. And that alone is enough to make him a problem, until he disappears and the world pretends he never mattered. Thanks for watching. I must appreciate for what you guys do for this channel. Your support, these likes and subscribes are lifeblood of this channel. Now, I really want to hear from you and welcome you to watch my next video by clicking the thumbnail that I hope you will like. Thanks for being here with me.